Hi people, this is Chris. Today's video is not a review like we do a lot on this channel. It's all about this Sonor vintage kit from the 70s, which is one of my favorite sets that I purchased in the last couple of years. Now I know that a lot of players are looking for a classic set like a 60s Ludwig, Gretsch or Rogers kit. The only downside is that most of these sets are a bit pricey, unless you are really lucky and find a seller who has no clue about their real value. So maybe these rather cheap Sonor The Swinger sets are one interesting alternative. So even over 50 years ago, in the early 70s, when these came out, companies were looking for opportunities to reduce the overall manufacturing costs for their entry to mid-level kits by using more budget-friendly hardware parts. However, different shell materials and qualities for different drum set lines as we know them today came a bit later. Meaning the shells that Sonor used for these swinger kits were the same 6-ply beech shells that can be found on the second generation of the Sonor Teardrop kits and were brought back a few years ago for the vintage series. But instead of the solid teardrop lugs and die-cast hoops, Sonor used plastic lugs and lighter steel profile hoops. What's cool is that the hole spacing of the lugs fits both teardrop and phonic lugs, so if you want to upgrade the shells with professional grade hardware, that's no problem at all. However, I think part of the magic lies in the relatively light build of both the shells and the hardware. And as you can see, I got the 20x14, 13x9 and 16x16 combination. And there was also a 22, 12, 13, 16 and a 22, 13, 16 configuration available. All sets were including a hardware pack that came from Taiwan, but there were no 18-inch bass drums or 14-inch floor toms. And there was also a seamless 14x5 chrome over brass snare sold along with the kits, but I have not got the chance to try one of these. So how did I get this set? I bought the bass drum and the rack tom with a holder for around 300 bucks here locally. However, even after a month of intense online searching, I could not find a matching floor tom in this relatively rare wrap called Rubinrot. So I finally bought a matching 6-ply beech teardrop shell with a finish, I think it was original Silbergrau, it's now more bluish. Plus the hardware parts a while later from ATTW drums here in Germany for around 100 euros. And it's a player's kit anyway, so it does not matter that much to me. And the pattern of the wrap matches up even if the color is very different. But if you're lucky, you can find complete 4-piece kits starting at around 250 bucks. And as you can see in this pic from sonormuseum.com, there were plenty of interesting looking wraps available. Okay, let's take a closer look at the hardware. As far as I learned from the vintage drum expert Fritz Steger, these first generation chrome-plated plastic lugs with the famous Sonor Klöppel logo were produced by the German drum company Rimmel, who also manufactured the metal hoops of the bass drums for Sonor. Fun fact, these were made on a machine for bicycle rims, and if you take a closer look, you will see that they are basically rims turned inside out. And there's a second generation, very much sought after with metal lugs. And the third generation of these sets came again with plastic lugs without the logo. And those lugs were produced in Taiwan. Also, the tom holder is a bit special. It has nothing in common with the later over-engineered Sonor hardware that came out in the late 70s. And I use a clamp from my Sonor phonic holder to stabilize it on the bottom, but I still need to find a way to make it more stable in the upper part too, because when hitting rim shots the tom starts to tilt a bit. And also the bass drum legs are very simple, so I use this anchor on the Reso hoop. The floor tom has later generation prism clamps, and I also added the per suspension fee to increase the sustain. The bass drum tunes up very easy with those wing screws. However, to have a bit more space for my pedal, I got matching slotted screws from ST drums. So all the drums got a cleaning and complete makeover, plus period correct bearing edges by Mick Scharf from Klangmacherei. And over the last couple of years he has been working on all my vintage drums, and he's really one of the best guys here in southern Germany, and I can highly recommend him. Speaking of bearing edges, in fact the edges were not present at all, they were just flat. And that's one fact you have to keep in mind if you're interested in vintage drums. If you want the tuning range and comfort of a modern drum, get them checked and redone by a professional drum builder. And Mick made some round over shaped edges that fit the vibe for that kit perfectly. And now the shells are leveled and a breeze to tune. And even the plastic lugs work perfectly fine. And if one breaks, there are plenty of used ones available on the aftermarket, at least here in Germany. So I would definitely use this kit for gigs too. So how about tuning and drum heads? In terms of heads, I think those Japanese Asapura heads, which are sounding very warm and less plasticky, are a perfect fit for the beech shells. And I got the ST250 coated heads for the toms, and the snare has one with a dot underneath. And even on the bass drum, both heads are single ply versions to get the maximum tone. So the Rimmel fiberskin head has no internal ring anymore. And also the bass drum beta head and EMAT had a little accident, so I removed the plastic ring and added the small felt stripe. I'm calling it Free Mat right now. And if you're wondering about the snare drum, this is a solid cherry steam band model in 14 by 5.5 by RBH Drums USA. One of my favorite wood drums that keeps sounding better every year. And I've paired it with some Tama brass hoops. And as you can hear, the whole set is tuned to a sort of medium range where it sounds very dynamic and vibrant without much dampening at all. Only inside the bass drum lies one of these Rimmel mufflers, or Weckelwurst as we call them in Germany, which is touching both heads. And all the single ply Reso heads are tuned a bit higher than the better heads. So the Swinger set is not one of the loudest sets overall, so using a higher tension on the heads and also tuning for the most open sound here in the room was my goal. And also I don't know why the manufacturers aren't selling 20, 13, 16 shell packs anymore. For me, this combination is much more versatile than the ones with 12 and 14-inch toms. So if you have any more questions on the drums, the mics, etc., leave them in the comments. I will also leave some links to the drum heads and also this bass drum beater by Dragonfly Percussion, which I was using. And if you want to support this channel, you can check them out. Hope to see you next time. Until then, bye!